Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Bavarian, and today we're going to take a look at the latest for Victoria 3. So everything in this video will be looking forward. We're going to take a look at last week's Dev Diary, this week's Dev Diary, and then the update discussion video that they did and talk about all those topics. I was in Stockholm, I met the Victoria 3 team there, and I would like to talk about how I feel about the future. You may have recalled a couple of times where I went, yeah, this really sucks right now. I am actually in a very different mood when it comes to that game, and I would like to discuss why. And obviously also listen to your opinions. Now on the other side, I also tomorrow will be publishing a video where I am discussing the current state of Victoria 3. I didn't at the time do a review for Sphere of Influence, but Sphere of Influence was really good. Certain weaknesses that I do want to discuss as well, but in general I think should be an interesting topic. Now after that, my god, after that we can finally sit down and simply play the game. You know, ages ago in VTM I implemented the entire Danish content where Denmark behaves differently, where the other AI behaves differently towards them and whatnot, and I think we're going to check that out. I think we're also going to check out the car list content in VTM that was done by Doodles, and we're going to go from there. So if you are hoping for gameplay, both of Victoria 3, Manor Lord, CK3 and so on, after the upcoming discussion videos, so this one and tomorrow's, we're going to finally start with that again. Anyway, let's take a look at what they wrote in the update 1.8 overview. They decided to combine the two updates, so they had 1.8 and 1.9 planned, with the result that 1.8 is now going to be a single update with a combined scope of both 1.8 and 1.9, meaning it will contain not just bug fixes and polish, but also some juicy news and new free features. As I said, this is just an overview Dev Diary, so we're not going to go into any great detail today, but we have plenty more Dev Diaries planned in the upcoming weeks, where we will fill in the blanks. One final thing before I start. All of the features mentioned are still in early stages of development, so don't worry about the screenshots too much. The first one will be ideological forces, political movement rework. A frequent complaint about Victoria 3's political system is the highly random nature of leader and character ideologies. The way in which you build up support for certain laws among your interest groups can be frustratingly opaque and reliant on using certain pieces of content, corn laws anyone, in a way that is neither immersive nor feels particularly rewarding. I can tell you that, and I think they mentioned this in the past as well, maybe even here in this Dev Diary, it is not random at all, right? I mean, obviously randomness factors into it, but your general environmental conditions are taken into account. If you check the script, then you will definitely see that, but none of this is actually exposed to the player. Which means for the player, if a character dies, they don't have any feeling of what comes next. Visualizing this, very similar to how they're visualizing this with the catalysts, I think is a really good step. In Update 1.8, we are taking aim at this problem, alongside a number of other issues with a feature that we have dubbed ideological forces, but which can be more accurately called political movement rework. The plan is to transform political movements from spontaneous and temporary demands for a single legal reform into longer-term ideological movements with a broader political agenda. For example, instead of a movement popping up to abolish slavery, you will have an actual abolitionist movement with a long-term legal agenda, which will attract supporters from your pops and influence the politics of the interest groups that those pops are backing. Political movements will also include religious and cultural minorities and majority movements, with some corresponding changes to civil war and secession mechanics. They have talked for a while now about wanting to connect agitators to nationalist movements, so secessionist movements. They've talked for a while now that interest groups will never be directly, reflective of secession movements. And I will be honest with you, if somebody that has sat down and has modded the Ottoman Empire, that has modded Austria, secessionist movements right now really suck. I have a number of times basically told people that were modding Austria, do not do it. It's not worth your time, because even if a secessionist movement fires, chances are they only get 1 or 2 or 3 provinces, Hungary for example, and are then crushed entirely. That is of course combined with the attitude that certain countries have, if you are a vassal, there is a good chance at this point in the game that you can get support independence as an interaction from any other big country that hates the person that is your overlord. As a secessionist movement, since you don't exist, you can't do that, so you can't actually really rely on anything. Reworking them within the framework of this ideological forces implementation right here, I think is a really good approach. And then right here we have the interest group of the intelligentsia. And this one is actually quite interesting. Take a look at this, right? So, sure, population, whatever, these are the ideologies as we know them. And then right here, we have the leader ideology chances. So once this leader, this guy right here, who is a pacifist, goes away, 86% chance for an abolitionist because of a massive, massive abolitionist fraternal association within this interest group. I do wonder, because there are many, many open questions that I have about this, but in 2 weeks we're going to be learning about this, so, then we should know more about it. I do wonder, can a political movement be a part of multiple interest groups? Because it should be, right, since it is made up primarily of the pops that join it, right? So if you have a pop that is quite inclined to be intelligentsia, but also inclined to, let's say, trade unions, then maybe they can join both of these. I really like the ideas of this, and I would even like to see this expanded eventually, where you basically have factions. You have wings within an interest group, and depending on how they are performing, you will be seeing different leaders slowly but surely rising up. Either way, having abolitionist fraternal association or any other movement really stick with interest groups, really stick with pops, I think is huge, because as things are, if you are, for example, a political movement to preserve a law, the moment you pass it, that movement is gone. We need that movement to stay there so that they can remain active, that they can do and continue to do certain things, so that you still have to struggle against them, even if you already passed the law that they wanted to maintain. In general, this is a really good change. I'm not too surprised by this coming, because they have talked about it a lot. Quite frankly, if you followed this game, everything they're talking about here, without a doubt, is something they have talked about, especially the next one, the discrimination rework. Ever since release, we have said multiple times that the overly simplistic nature of discrimination is something we want to improve on in the future, and now that future is finally here. This feature is still in the figuring it out stage, so I'll eschew the details, but our principal goals with it are as follows. To introduce multiple levels to discrimination instead of it just being a binary state, so accepted or discriminated. To have the level of discrimination faced by a pop be determined by factors other than just what the law says. What they talked about very often is basically inter-pop discrimination. So imagine you are the United States of America, you win the Civil War, no longer, are they slaves, obviously, and maybe you don't even discriminate against Afro-Americans at that point legally, but the Dixie Pops surely would probably still act against them, right? That is the entire idea when it comes to the different levels of discrimination. Now, I'm not sure how exactly they will implement this, because that isn't easy to do. You will have to track a lot. Like, for example, cultural acceptance is tracked in CK3, and that might just be quite too much when it comes to, all the data that you need to track. But we'll see. To turn assimilation into a properly useful feature that isn't one available to fully accepted pop. See, categorically, from a design point of view, I actually think their approach to assimilation makes perfect sense, where you effectively say, unless you are accepted, you cannot be assimilated, because people would never accept you. That is, of course, especially the case if you come from, for example, a different ethnicity. But practically speaking, gameplay-wise, yeah, it makes the feature relatively useless, right? Because that just means if you accept them, they're already happy and then they can assimilate, which means it doesn't matter that they assimilate. I am very, very interested in seeing how that goes. I would assume, if we take a look at this image right here, that you essentially will end up with a point where starting at 2, they can already get integrated or assimilated, right? Whereas here at 3 and 4, that is not the case. So you don't need to go all the way to number 1. You can be at a relative level of discrimination and still okay with the way this works. So this right here is very clearly a design concept. We can see this because this is just they just plastered acceptance over what was normally written there. I assume it was related to culture. Oh, look at that. They even changed the symbol there. That's so funny. Okay, listen, that's just kind of funny. We have different acceptance statuses. This one right here seems to be fully discriminated, very hated. This is like, okay, maybe we're not going to openly attack you. Then you have varying levels of full integration right here. And then after all, I would guess this is like full integration, assimilation. You are part of the whole. I do wonder whether that means we can add and remove primary cultures. That would be kind of interesting, I'm not gonna lie, right? So France, for example, starts with only French, but if you treat the Occitans well enough, maybe you can fully turn them into primary if you really do it, but I assume at that point it should be relatively difficult. Either way, we can see violent hostility is the current level, so that is 20 to 39. As appears to be this one. I assume this one means locking them up. Oh, this one looks like expelling them. There's like a bag, there's like a family moving away. This one is violent suppression even still. Then right here we have maybe like being friendly servants, that kind of thing. And then this looks like one of the same cloth, right? Cut from the same cloth. They stand together, not as the same, but as brothers nonetheless. I wonder whether these are policies. This one looks activated, so I wonder whether this is something that you very consciously do or whether that is just something that occurs with the particular acceptance status. Now, the other really interesting thing is this right here. Can vote in elections from disenfranchisement law. This is so important. If you think of Austria, you have so many different minorities that at a certain point had different rights. That is just the way it was. It was in a non-equal circumstance. The Hungarians, of course, in particular, I mean, it is a big, big topic, the Ausgleich and so on, right? They mattered more than other minorities in the realm. And I'm really eager, basically, to see a level where I can say, yeah, okay, you know what, Hungarians, you get to vote, you get to be a part of interest groups, which, if you're fully discriminated right now, that is not the case. You are not really a part of this, right? Whereas other groups might not have that scenario going for themselves. I really like this level of granularity for sure. Only consumes the raw fish goods type from Let Them Eat Fish law. This, for example, for me really factors in with, for example, the Irish potato famine, and I know we're going to come to that topic even later, but let's say you forbid them from eating grain or potatoes. Well, I think it is just depicted as grain in the game anyway, right? That would be the equivalent. Let's say you forbid them from eating it so that you can export it, and then, well, obviously they start starving because that is what they produce locally, which means anything they don't produce locally is in a worse circumstance. They can't access it, right? Driving up their prices and driving them into a famine. This is the way that I currently can envision the Irish potato famine working, and we've talked about this for so long that it was just effectively impossible to do in the current, fashion of Victoria 3. With this overall, with however this works, this should be functional. They also have exclusive access to comfy chair goods. Obviously, this is, like I said, a mock-up. Maximum status for Weicher cast pops. So if you are a certain pop type, you can still get the maximum status, even if the rest... Oh, that's so good! That means in India, no longer will all of you rich pops be joining any rebellions. They will just go, what do I care for the lot of the common Indian, right? Oh, that is... Wow, we're really... It's terrible, right? Okay, but those are good circumstances for, actually simulating the conditions of the world. Cultural and religious acceptance, you can see this right here as well. I'm looking at this now, right? And this kind of just confuses me. Anglo-Canadian, 36%. Is this between the cultures? Why is Irish here so often? I don't know. Why is it red? This looks like it's looking good. This is going down, so this is going up, this is going down. I don't know, maybe it's just because of the mock-up, maybe they meant to have different ones here. Either way, I hope that they do a proper intercultural discrimination and that this then factors into interest group choices as well. That you, for example, would never say, okay, well, I am a liberal, but the liberals currently want to give rights to a culture that I really hate, so I'm not going to support them. That you can see those kind of scenarios. After that, of course, we see pops with violent hostility status and then laws affecting acceptance so that you can change them right here. Those are just generic names. They haven't figured them out yet. It looks like we are getting more laws no matter what. At PDXCon 2022, that is when we played Victoria 3 for the first time, I talked to the developers, I talked to Wiz, and he just went on and on again. Like, I really want to do autonomous investment. I really, really want to do it. I couldn't do it before launch. It couldn't be done, but I want to do it. And I said, okay, that's nice. Probably in like 3 years, right? No, that happened much faster. This right here, very, very similar. I remember before and even during release, they were essentially going, yeah, we want to change that. And I thought, okay, well, see you in 5 years. I know how the timescale of this stuff works. No. See you next year. We are going to get this, and I am so eager to see. I mean, actually, next year. Is this not part of 1.8? Oh, it's totally part of 1.8. Oh my god, see you this year. Oh, I am so glad with where Victoria 3 is right now. Let's continue with this Dev Diary. Let's finish this Dev Diary, jump to the next one, so that we can then slowly but surely talk about the future of Victoria 3 and where I am standing on that perspective. Food availability, famines, and harvest incidents. In Update 1.8, we are also planning to expand on the gameplay around agriculture and food availability, which of course was an issue of great importance to governments at the time. After all, the 19th century saw events such as the Irish potato famine, the repeated famines in British-controlled India, and the worldwide famines in the wake of the Krakatoa explosion. To do this, we're going to introduce the concept of food availability for POPs, which is a factor that is separate from, but intrinsically linked to, a POP standard of living. Currently, we are thinking that food availability for a POP will be determined by how much of their buy package, so what they purchase weekly, goes towards feeding themselves, how expensive the food goods they're purchasing is, and whether there are any shortages among those goods. Low food availability will increase POP mortality and radicalism and may trigger a statewide famine if it's widespread enough. So basically, even if they can purchase their goods, there is a chance that a famine is basically assumed if the implicit supply with food goods is too expensive or even in a shortage, right? That kind of stuff. And that way you can get then worsened circumstances. to me, this sounds really good, because this means even if you're producing food, if you don't have access to that food, like you're not allowed to buy it, for example, or the food is just very expensive, even locally, you can still run into a famine. It gets especially worse if you have a population center where you're not producing anything. All of a sudden, you're looking at conditions where a famine can happen relatively quickly if just your market gets screwed over by whatever that might be. Food production at the time was highly dependent on the weather and climate, and many peasant families were only 1 or 2 bad harvests away from the brink of ruin. That's subsistence farms right here. To simulate this unpredictability, we are also adding something called harvest incidence, which can increase or decrease agricultural output in different regions over a longer time frame. Thank God. I love this so much. The more procedural disasters and blessings we get, I think the more will we be happy with the population simulation. Because effectively what it ends up with is just a condition now where I can't plan for everything because sometimes random things happen. And then I need to adjust to it. And I think that is exactly where you want to be with a simulation like this, to kind of counteract everything being perfectly manageable by the player. And then right here we have a map of harvest incidents. You can see it right there. In East Africa, things are looking dire, as are they, of course, here in Xinjiang. And then right here we have in Ukraine, actually, in Western Ukraine, we have a bit of an issue going on, which is, of course, terrible, because right here what we are looking at, effectively, is the breadbasket of the Russian Tsardom. This right here is a bug, obviously, although I will say I think it would be pretty fun if you also had the same condition, but for fish, right? If you just said, oh yeah, no, all around Japan right now, no fish. They are like, this is going to be dire. That would be cool. But again, the sea zone being colored in right now is just a visual bug. Don't worry about it too much. I really like this. This would make it so that your market, that your conditions, that the way things are, if you have a very drastic war going on, it could change things for the considerable worse, and I very much would welcome it. All of these features, and this is basically it, are super cool. I'm not surprised by any of them, but I am surprised by them being tackled now already. I say already, and that's a bit generous. I mean, we are what now? Almost 2 years since Victoria 3's release, right? But I will say, I mean, these are extra layers that I have not seen done this way in Victoria as a series, but also in any other game. Imperator Rome, funnily enough, comes very close there, especially with the mod, of course, that I replaced, which I just forgot the name of. I think Mayo in Texas also kind of leans into that direction, although Mayo in Texas, of course, goes way harder on being, just way harder into any direction, really. I have nothing negative to say about this. I have no concerns. I need this stuff in the game. The fact that it's coming with 1.8 is incredibly good. That is incredibly good for me. Now, what they also are going to do, and which they will talk about, and they talk about it partially at least, for the upcoming, or in the next Dev Diary already, that we are also going to work through in this video right here, are companies owning and investing in buildings, bulk nationalization tools, multi-select and right-click order for formations. Right-click order for formations, hasn't a mod already done this? I think it's called VTM. I think a guy named Doodles has already done this. Alright, come on, get gut. Adding war goals on behalf of subjects. All of these things are also being targeted for 1.8. Very happy to see this, without a doubt. Let's move on to the other Dev Diary that came out just today and discuss what is going on with, in particular, companies owning and investing in buildings and the bulk nationalization tool. Alright, so here we are now for bulk nationalization and companies building ownership. Let's just jump straight in. Bulk nationalization should be something that is on your mind. I remember when they gave us access to Sphere of Influence, that was one of the big ones. I went communist and it was great. I had a really good time. Until you find out that you have to nationalize everything manually and everything level by level and yada yada yada. It was not great. I did not enjoy it, and it sucked. Really glad that they are addressing this. And it should have been in earlier, don't get me wrong here. This is one of those UX things. Victoria 3 will always have trouble with UX just because there's so much happening in that particular game, right? There are so many interconnections. I get it. It's tough to do anything in terms of getting the UX right? But my god, it should have been here earlier. We don't need to talk about the details there, we can just take a look at the pretty pictures. Building registry is where you do it, so in your general list right here of any given buildings. And then you can nationalize the filtered buildings, which directly means whatever filter you are applying. Let's say I only want to look at buildings that, I obviously own, that are non-urban. And maybe I'm even going to limit it to like a particular set of farms, whatever that might be, in a particular set of states. Then I start nationalizing them, and once I click that button, right, we get this menu right here, nationalize. Nationalize buildings, seizing the building levels and making them nationally owned. You see the impact, and then you see from whom you can get them. If there are more, so this is British privately owned, it could be British state owned, I assume British company owned also would work, right? And then for any other type also where, you know, that kind of stuff, if they are eligible for this, you can start nationalizing this, and obviously if you have a certain law that allows you to do this, you can stop giving them compensation. This right here will be a must-have. By the way, I'm seeing you. I'm seeing you right there. Take a look at that. I see the company one. It has the placeholder smiley right there. But yeah, so clearly they are making it in a sense now where nationalization is relatively easy. You can target it very easily, and this looks just perfect to use. Honestly, this is basically the dream. This is what I had in mind when I first was nationalizing. I said afterwards, I'm not going to nationalize like en masse anything anymore because this really sucked. Very glad to see that changing. You can see a list of all affected buildings on top and the main sliders underneath to determine how many levels you would like to nationalize as you know it from the existing tool. Additionally, to the left of it, we have added a shortcut to filter by a specific ownership type in order to allow you to only select manor house owned properties, for example, because who needs these landowners really? Can we see this here? I don't think we can see this here. At least not properly, right? But anyway, it doesn't matter. You get the drill, right? You can get a particular type and then you start nationalizing them away. Oh, here it is. I am blind. There you go. Filter. British privately owned buildings. Who owns it? Manor houses, financial districts, worker owned, yada yada yada. And that is how you can get that done. No, this is good UX. It's, you know, really nice. Wish it had been there earlier, but better late than never. On the right side of the window, you see the summed up consequences. All that's left to do is press the button and take control. Big fan. Let's talk about companies building ownership. As we wrote in the past when we talked about companies, we've always had a bunch of ideas on how to expand the feature to integrate it more to the simulation. One of these ideas was giving established companies actual ownership over building levels in the country which they would positively affect, rather than applying it to all buildings in your country. So, now that we have shipped the 1.7 update, which contained the building ownership rework that actually allows other buildings to take controls of levels, it felt only natural to take this next step for companies too. The way we do this is by giving each established company a headquarter building. This building will act much like a financial district or manor house. They're going to have POPs working in them, have an ownership portfolio overview, etc. So, you still decide which companies to establish in order to specialize your country, but how that plays out will be different. The establishment of a company HQ may require you to give away some of your own building levels or provide the necessary funds. Details on this still need to be evaluated and implemented as we are approaching 1.8, but the conditions will likely be dependent on your economic laws. When you decide to establish a company, we determine in which state its HQ will spawn based on where in your country the relevant industries are the most prominent. So, if you establish Friedrich Krupp, for example, a company that cares about steel, guns and artillery, it looks through your country and finds the state with the highest number of building levels of these types and will settle there. Friedrich Krupp being established in Westphalia, the major steel-producing state in Prussia. Take a look at that. You can see now they have their very own building right here in Westphalia. This will be the HQ, and then they will start owning things. Once established, companies can invest into new building levels like financial districts or manor houses. They make use of the investment pool for this. Depending on how much they or the POPs in them have contributed to it, there will be more or less investments from companies into new levels. Like the other ownership buildings, the company HQ level will increase with each level they build or buy. A goal that we have with their investment logic is that companies should start investing much more locally, for example in their own state, before expanding to your country. But of course, if you have foreign investment rights in place, companies will also be able to make use of that and start building new steel mills on the other side of the world. But keep in mind that companies will only ever invest in buildings of their assigned types. So Friedrich Krupp will never build a ranch, for example. Makes sense. I mean, that is how it works, right? With like everything, basically. Let's take a look at this. We can see the portfolio right there. They own these in Westphalia, North Rhine and Prussian-Anhalt. They are making money. They're doing well. Not really having any trouble there. Another major change that we're doing with this update is of course to change the throughput and construction bonuses. Companies will only affect the buildings that are actually belonging to them, rather than every single building of fitting type in your country. To compensate for this, we increase the bonus that companies are providing. The same is true for the construction bonus, which is applied only to buildings that are funded by the company. So basically, they are giving it now to fewer buildings, but it will be stronger. That's the balancing that you do there. Makes perfect sense. In the interface, we will represent company ownership with their icon wherever a level is owned by them. We're also thinking about adding a new color, but we'll see. What we also do to visualize company ownership is take it into the third dimension. We will show on the world map that a building has an association to a company in the form of billboards. I'm sorry, but I love the art team. I was so tilted, and I brought this up actually a couple times when I talked to Victoria 3 devs in Stockholm. I was so tilted when I rewatched my review of Voice of the People. I could hear myself becoming more and more tilted. And then there's like a segment where it's like, oh, the art of it. Yeah, the art is really, really good. Okay, let's move on to other stuff where I get more tilted. That is my feedback, I think, for Victoria 3's art team, for CK3's art team as well. The art teams are nailing it. Even if a DLC, even if a patch sucks, the art teams are on top of their game. Take a look at this. This will look so, so cute. You look around your cities, they now have more character. They have this beautiful symbol, of course, going on, justifying the position right there. Take a look at this at night. I only, by the way, play Victoria 3 at night. Not literally here, but rather, you know, in the game. I cannot see anything else anymore. I love the way the night looks. I love the little trains with their little lights, the ships with their lights. The art team is tremendous, just unhinged. For the future, we can see potential to expand this kind of visualization to other areas, for example, ships and trucks, but that's out of the scope for 1.8 at least. While this ownership change is a major step forwards for companies, it's not the end of our plans for them. We cannot provide you a timeline for further improvements yet, but we do see potential to expand on them with features like political impact, for example, influencing IGs or enactment of certain laws, and company-leading characters among other things. But that's for another time. Next Dev Diary, which is on the 19th of September, Martin will walk you through the changes they are making to political movements, so that will also be interesting. All the changes here, the UX changes, but also the way companies work and the way they want to make companies work, right? Where companies are basically a rich people lobby, not just an IG lobby, but rather a rich people lobby. Maybe they want you to go to war, colonize certain things, and so on. I think all good. Those are all good things. None of those are bad things. I remember, and this is something that I came around on to a degree. I really want to say to a degree. But I remember power blocks were something that was like, I really wish this design went so much further. And I still, to a degree, I doubtlessly still want this. But they kind of managed to like do that much, much better than I thought they would in Sphere of Influence. More on that tomorrow, right? But I always had something to criticize. Here, nothing. Do what you're doing. You're doing great. Okay, keep it up. Now, the last part, before we just come to a general evaluation on how I feel about Victoria 3 going forward, is about stuff they covered in a video where I just wrote down basically a couple of points, you know, that they talked about, but that they didn't cover in any of these Dev Diaries. Let's take a gander. Okay, as I am melting here under the current temperatures, let's take a gander at what I have written down. First of all, they have talked a lot about the Navy. They have discussed certain things going on with the Navy, that they want to make it much more tangible, that they want to have proper boats, that they want to go into all of this. Now, I will tell you right now, I have very high expectations. I made a video, I think a year ago now, that I rewatched yesterday, and that I stand by entirely. I think what I was pitching there as a system for the Navy, and how it should work in my eyes, is still a good system. Whether it actually works in practice is obviously something else, but I think that is like the baseline. That is the minimum for me. I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, watch that video, take that in, check out how you feel about that, right? Because obviously the Navy rework will be big. Right now, navies are just barracks, but on the ocean. They don't work the way they should work, they're very finicky, and they just generally kind of suck, I'll be honest with you. I hope that we are getting a really good Navy system. They already talked about it, and this is a second point that they mentioned. They want to make interests more interesting, right? Having an interest in the world currently isn't all that compelling. You just plop it down. The bigger your navy, the more do you get. Certain other factors, sure, they factor into this, but in general, they don't mean that much. If you have an actual naval presence there, if you have, you know, basically you have multi-layered interests, the way it impacts things, what you can do, and so on. And to have a globe-spanning empire, you need a globe-spanning navy. What they want to do there sounds right up my alley and right what I want, but the devil's in the details. The way the Navy has to work is vital because this is a game about global empire building. I'm really looking forward to this. They didn't detail it any further than that, right? But I will say, I'm confident that this should go into the right direction. I don't want to lean myself too far out of the window, right, if this goes completely into hell. But I'm saying this because, as far as I'm concerned, I think that they've probably seen the video. I think that they've thought about, like, a lot of stuff related to that video, but also to their own designs and where they want to go. I just want a good Navy game, man. I just want to sit down and be like, wow, look at that. Okay, so I'm Brazil. I don't really have any big ships. I don't have none of that nonsense because I don't need it. I'm not confronting Britain on the global stage. I'm confronting Argentina and Venezuela and Peru, Bolivia. And for that, I just need a local navy to shut down your trade so that you're isolated and I can win any local conflict. I need to be in a position where it matters that my navy is aiding in the colonization game and so on, right? Those are like the baseline requirements that I have. I think we're probably walking into the right direction here. But this is a very complex topic, and I hope that they're nailing it. Because like I said, this is huge. I stand by that video, and I will be comparing everything they do to that video, not gonna lie. So make sure to watch that if you're interested in that. Other than that, like I said, interest should be more multi-layered, should be more multifaceted, what you can do with it. I think this directly corresponds to having more limited levels of warfare. You know, I'll be honest with you, for example, when you have a conflict going on in China and I'm Prussia, sure, if I have an interest there right now, I can just hop in. But realistically speaking, that wouldn't be happening. That kind of pressure is something you just cannot exert unless you have a proper navy. It changed obviously later on as the Hochseeflotte was built and so on, and it's not like Prussia didn't have any diplomatic ties to China. They, with the Eulenberg expedition, they actually got some trade deals from China and Siam as well. But in general, of course, if Britain declares a war on China, Prussia should not be able to hop in. It's just that simple. There should be so many more layers between this, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, the next one is the military, and this is the biggest pain point, regardless of anything else, regardless of what they've done. They've acknowledged as well that they're not done with reworking it yet. What they mentioned in the video were military access and limited wars, and I'll be honest with you, military access obviously is meaningful, especially if we take a look at what is going on with Prussia and Denmark. If Prussia and Denmark fight, Prussia historically could just walk through the German Confederation. Now, it's a bit difficult if you do that in Victoria 3, because fighting on, for example, Mecklenburg's land means that Mecklenburg's land gets, just basically destroyed, which is realistic, but maybe not what we traditionally agree to when we do military access in other games like Hearts of Iron 4 and so on, or even EU4. You don't really get any consequences out of it. But the biggest thing here for me is actually the limited wars. So what I mean here is that if you have a kerfuffle in the colonies, it should not necessarily, it can, but it should not necessarily become something much, much bigger. When you have the Crimean War going on, this shouldn't inherently be a war where you're fighting at the mainline front line against Russia there. It can be something that escalates into that point, but the importance to me here personally is that the way warfare currently works, this is both on the Navy and on the Army level, is that there is no stickiness. That's what I've called it repeatedly on Discord, on their Victoria 3 Discord and so on. I think what we need is army stickiness, is fleet stickiness. I mentioned it in the Navy video as well, actually. I hope when they say limited wars that they try to kind of emphasize it will make sense for you to have troops at high cost stationed overseas. Because what you can do right now is, let's say you're Britain, let's say somebody attacks you in India, you need 0 troops in India to fight effectively there. What I want is that if I ship somebody in from India or from Britain, those people should be fighting worse and only start building up experience as they enter India and actually start fighting there, right? Which means if I have troops actually already stationed in India, they build that up in peacetime and then have a much, much better experience fighting in that region. I think that is actually super important because otherwise, you can fight wherever, whenever, and whichever way you want, right? It should matter that you have to maintain and pay for a global empire by having a global army. Obviously, there were different models right there. The British at some point pushed those costs towards their colonies by saying Canada, by saying Australia, South Africa, you have to build your own navy and your own army. We will not pay for that anymore. You have to do that. The Little Englanders in particular were really pushing for that. My point being, I hope when they say limited wars, they also mean actually having some stickiness in mission efficiency and such for armies and navies. So that when I'm Siam and I'm being threatened by Britain, I can't be having 300 million different soldiers now fighting me, but rather it is just whatever the British are really allocating to that war, right? And then it is very easy to see how much they're allocating, and for them also easy to see how much I am allocating. That's super important because it will never feel good otherwise. I'm going to come to warfare just when we get to the end of this video, which is very, very soon, trust me. But let's continue for a second. They also want to improve diplomatic plays. So that means they want to negotiate, or they want to allow you to negotiate a deal during the play. And when a war is going, they also sometimes want you to be able to return to the actual negotiation table, which means that you can stop the war for a second, negotiate, and then either you have a settlement or you don't. Other than that, they also want to rework legitimacy, which means that they want actual government agendas, where the government basically goes, okay, so you voted us in, how much did we actually do? right? We are legitimate, sure, people believe in us, we have the political powers, maybe we even have the votes, but if we didn't do anything, if we didn't maintain the status quo, if we wanted to maintain the status quo, or change the status quo if we wanted to change it, then, well, yeah, obviously that should be a hit to IG approval, population approval, yada yada yada. There should be a lot going on there. I assume the political movement rework will directly feed into that as well. And then last but not least, trade change is something they also want to do. They were very unclear, very vague about what they want there. But the tendency here seems to be autonomous trade, very similar to autonomous investment, so that you set the grander policy and then your pops, your companies and so on invest or rather trade for you. But of course you can also strike deals personally. Now all of those that we have now discussed after the Dev Diaries are not 1.8 as far as I understand it. They are later, sometime in 2025 or 2026, but that is the plan going forward, and I am really looking forward to that. Those are good plans. Listen, let's talk about the future of Victoria 3. Am I excited for it? Am I not excited? There was a time, and I like Victoria 3. I've always liked Victoria 3. But there was a time where I was like, the hygiene factors, and I verbalized this. I remember this. I verbalized this, I think, after Voice of the People. The hygiene factors are just too awful. Okay, Voice of the People flopped for many reasons, sure. But when I recommend a friend, and I play multiplayer, or we try anyway, it can be difficult. I play multiplayer about every week. And when I pitch this game to a new friend, I should never have to go, also, here are a list of 20 caveats that you need to consider because they might make you angry as you play. They might enrage you and you would be justified in them. So, good luck, right? That can never happen. That is not how a game should ever function. To this day, so I think a lot of the hygiene factors, so basically hygiene factor is a term that is used to describe a factor that if it doesn't work well, it's a big negative, but if it works right, it doesn't make anybody want to play. Nobody wants to play because the military system works right, but they don't want to play if it works poorly, right? So you need to fix the hygiene factor so that you get to the baseline, to the level 0, and then your good features can upgrade it to a higher level. That's what that term means. To this day, many hygiene factors have been fixed. Many of the concerns and complaints have been fixed, and many of them are being addressed going forward. I still think that the military, the way it is not fixed. And I'm not talking the Navy here, because for the Navy, I presented a counter offer, like a counter design, and they are now clearly designing their own, hopefully a good one. Obviously, the Navy doesn't work this way. But even for the military as it is right now, I think there are many, many flaws with it that are enraging and that are not great. What I mean here, for example, in particular, is a circumstance where when somebody asks, how do you build your army? The information that you need to give is, well, 50% need to be infantry, just so that you don't get a malus, right? And then you build for offense and defense, because artillery, if you attack somebody, the way the algorithm works, you don't attack like you would expect with, for example, infantry and horses, and then artillery in the back, right? As you would expect, maybe, and then later in a different time frame, in a different technology level, it would be slightly different, with siege artillery being basically what creates the attack, right? You initiate, and then your infantry starts going out of the trenches and attacking through no man's land, that kind of stuff. None of that stuff happens. The actual calculation is, give me highest offense value if I'm on the attack, and give me highest def value, and then we just select those units, which means there's a good chance that if you have enough artillery on that front line, you're going to have an attack that is just artillery fighting just infantry. It's complete nonsense. It doesn't make any sense, neither intuitively nor gameplay-wise, and it often leads to a case where you have to flip back and forth your armies. The AI doesn't really understand it. There are many shortcomings with this. In general, it's quite annoying. There's still issues with front lines, with the way front lines, for example, can split. Although it is very rare nowadays, it can still happen. It can be frustrating. There are bugs every now and again when it comes to, for example, immediately after 1.7, sometimes armies will just teleport home if a front line closes, instead of moving home, which can suck if you're way overseas and you still had an open front line. My point being, the hygiene factor military needs to be solved. It's still not solved. And this is my huge complaint about this. No matter how we look at this, no matter where it's like, oh, is the AI strong enough? You know, like, can they, like, get stuff done? Those are day-to-day balancing issues. The military system needs more attention. I'm dead serious about this. I think this is, like, my biggest complaint. It was a big attempt. I think that should be acknowledged, but at some point you have to get it under control, right? So, for the future of Victoria 3, all of the goals that they have, and what they've done so far puts me in a very positive mood. But the military is still such a big factor where it's so clearly annoying in so many ways that needs to be crucified. That needs to be figured out. I hate when I play multiplayer. I love multiplayer, first of all. I love playing multiplayer in Victoria 3. We do it all the time. We argue like crazy. But I hate it whenever one of my friends goes, yo, this stuff's annoying. I'm like, yeah, I know. That is annoying. You're not wrong. That needs to go. So that is my big point. But I'm way more positive today than I was a year ago. Entirely almost. Because a year ago, I was looking at this, and I think it wasn't even like a start of this year, right? I was like, VTM is only getting bigger. VTM, if you don't know, I maintain VTM with Doodles. He maintained it like basically solo for like the last patches. And I was looking at this and I was like, I'm really frustrated because VTM is only getting bigger. There's so many things where it's like, we have to fix this locally. Mobilization options didn't work properly for the AI for a really long time. Really, that was really sucky. We have to do so many things and it really sucks. I am incredibly positive right now that VTM will become thinner and thinner and thinner and possibly stop existing soon enough. The way things have been done over the last year gives me the feeling that the Victoria 3 team has found really where it wants to be. Like, it has understood how it can work and make things happen on a rather consistent notion. As far as I'm concerned, I think Victoria 3 right now has a really good year ahead of itself. Honestly, I'm going to go that far. I don't know whether they do. I don't know. Maybe they're like all leaving the company tomorrow. Who the hell knows, right? But maybe they're getting cancelled tomorrow. But all I can say is, from where I'm standing, I didn't expect that Victoria 3 would give me this bright an outlook, basically, going forward, right? The goals that they have, the designs of their implementations, and the way that they are approaching changing the game now, I think are all deeply, deeply positive. Sphere of Influence was a really good step. They needed at the end of the expansion pass. Let's not beat around the bush here. They've had a bunch of good content. I mean, a bunch of good content, right? Like autonomous investment, all that stuff come out ever since they released. But the reality is, I think the reality we can all agree is that most patches came out and it was like, oh, Jesus, I need to wait like for a while before I can play this. There's just so much here. That didn't work right. Sphere of Influence was basically not plagued by that. There were issues. The AI was like underbuilding, that kind of stuff, but like performance got better. The features were all nice. It was great fun. And I hope that we are now, with this streak broken, are seeing, like a really good future ahead of us. I will tell you that, like, I'm quite confident in this. I had the pleasure, and we're going to go more into detail of this actually in tomorrow's video. I had the pleasure of talking to the person behind, like, the what do you call it, the great game and all that stuff. So like the objective itself and the other narrative content, and we were talking, and I was basically saying, okay, what's your evaluation of this? Where do you go from there? And the feedback that I got there actually inspires me a lot, I think, with confidence, because it was like, oh yeah, no. So these were all the issues. This is like what really didn't work right. But I think if we like listen, the worst case scenario from my point of view, having followed Paradox and having followed many, many games over the years as a content creator, having interacted with a lot of devs, the worst thing that can happen is if a developer looks you in the eye and says, I don't really know, this looks great to me. Like, this is flawless, man. I don't think that is the current attitude in the Victoria 3 team. I think they are quite well aware of what works and what doesn't, and where to go from there. That's my impression at the end of the day, right? So, whether you believe it or not, obviously, is like completely subjective for very good reasons. But all I can say is, for me personally, I think the huge pain patches are over. And I beg you, if you're on the team, do not disprove me, okay? I'm really just hoping that basically, like, the good days, the solely good days are about to start. I'm very positive about Victoria 3. More positive, I think, than I'm about really any other game right now. Yeah. Anyway, my point of view is basically everything they're implementing is stuff that they were talking about in the past, and I thought would be coming in 3 or 4 years, right? Sphere of Influence, tomorrow, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about where the game currently is, what annoys me, what makes me very happy, and how I personally feel about Sphere of Influence. I would love to hear your opinion. I know I didn't do a review at the time, just was doing other stuff essentially. But yeah, no, we're gonna take a look at all that. I think the future is very bright. And I'm looking forward to see you there. I'm looking forward to finally playing the game on the channel a little bit. We're going to do Denmark first, then probably Spain, and then we're going to see where we go from there. I know I owe all of you a Greece playthrough still. Yeah, that one dropped off the face of the earth, huh? Folks, let me know what you think about the plans that they've announced. Let me know how you feel about the current state of the game. And I'll see you tomorrow with the video of the retrospective, and then we're going to finally jump back into some gameplay. I will leave you right here, and I'll see you later, alligator.